Eerily haunting true stories about remote abandoned locations rich in history. Come with us in our travels from state to state, if you dare.
Be the last time anybody sees us alive. I don't know where she has us, but we're gonna get killed.
Hello?
Gina, there is a beehive over there. Do you see that in the hole?
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Welcome to 50 States of Madness.
Hi, welcome to 50 States of Madness.
Welcome to 50 States of Madness.
I'm so excited to be here.
I know, I can tell.
Well, we're having a little bit of issues before we started recording, like my hot flashes.
Shannon's having hot flashes. So.
Oh my goodness, it's so bad right now. So
I think it might just be me.
I'm like, it is. It's a little bit. Yeah,
I make her hot.
That could be the problem, or it could be our topic today. I'm just kidding.
Or not. Or not.
So,
what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about when we went to Wyoming and we visited the forts, and we're going to focus on Fort Bridger today.
Yes, we are.
Because it has some really interesting connection to
the Donner Party.
The Donner Party, yes. Yeah. So we're going to dive into that today. Mm-hmm. But we're really excited about what's coming up for us after the holidays.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Should we tell them, or I feel like we should just tell them?
I think we should say something. Just a little teaser. Just
say where we're going.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Shannon and I have there isn't much planning when it comes to our trips.
They just happen when they
happen. So, in about 4
weeks.
Exactly 4 weeks from today.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is.
It is exactly 4 weeks from today. Shannon and I will be going on our next venture, and we will be going to Houston, Texas.
Yes.
And New Orleans.
Yes. So I'm excited.
And I have to be honest, I was really excited about going to New Orleans. However, in the beginning, I was like, Houston, Texas. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about it. And I've had a change of heart.
There's a lot that's gone down in Houston, Texas.
So, yeah.
Oh, my God. I think my accent's going to come back when I'm there.
Gonna come back.
I had it up until 5 years old. I was born in Oklahoma.
I know. Oh, God, I can't even imagine you trying to say aspartame with the southern accent.
With the locals there. I don't even know if I can have it come back, but
I don't think in a week and a half it's gonna come back.
I hope it does. I hope by the end of when we come back and I record, I'm gonna have
you guys will know that we've been to Texas and back.
My accent will come back. Yes.
Oh, all right then. So we're super excited to be taking our next trip. We were originally just planning on traveling during the summertime because since we both work at schools, we have our summers off, and so it's a perfect time. And it's good traveling, makes for good traveling weather too, because a lot of these places that we're going does have some severe winters.
Yeah.
So we don't want to run into anything like that. But the opportunity, the opportunity arise, and so we're off.
My daughter's moving to Houston, so we're going to help her move, and we decided, hey,
we're going to
check it out.
Opportunity to dive into some true crime cases. So I'm really excited because this is really up my alley.
It's all you.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this, and So the next few weeks we will be probably the majority of our podcasts after this one will be mostly true crime.
It's going to be a handful of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're going to go down that
we're gonna do
rabbit hole.
Yeah. We're going to do some Christmas and New Year's true crime. And then after that, we will be in Texas. So,
yeah, I'm excited.
And a little disclaimer, we are in Los Angeles, and USC is playing. My family is watching
Yes.
it. So if you hear people screaming in the back, all is well. It's just football.
Dun, dun, dun,
So-
dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 dun. I don't know who I'm going for. No. I am
So-
crossing my fingers right now. So I hope it, but right now,
I'm not a college football fan,
but-
so
it's very nerve wracking right now. So, well, we're going to get into Fort Bridger.
okay.
So I'm going to go with the history. I'm going to try to give you all the correct dates and everything, but I have my little handy dandy notes right here in front of me just in case. But so we had the opportunity to go visit Fort Bridger. It wasn't originally on our list,
No.
but we had people telling us that you need to go down there and check it out. It's a really cool fort. You know, they preserved it. It's actually not the original fort because the original fort was burned down, but it is a replica of it.
Replica's pretty. It's pretty. I mean, I guess I didn't really know what to expect when we went.
Yeah.
But I was. It was very.
It's
very
gorgeous.
Cool. It
Yeah.
was so cool.
I mean, and especially if you love history and stuff. And we got to meet a really nice couple there who knew a lot about the place and the history. And so they shared a little bit of that. And hopefully we'll have some of his interview in
Yeah.
our, after we're done editing, we'll have him talk a little bit too.
Yeah, because this is another one of the spots that we visited where people were, again, just so helpful and willing to tell their stories and, the history that they knew and share it with us and allow us to record them
Yeah.
and use them on our podcast. So that was very cool.
It was pretty awesome. So Fort Bridger, back in the 1800s, fur trapping was a huge way to make money. Well, it started to decline. It wasn't as popular anymore. Beaver trapping wasn't that profitable, but there was a gentleman there by the name of Bridger. Let me get his first name, Jim Bridger. And he didn't want to leave the area. He really loved the area of Wyoming and the area that they were living in. And he wanted to think of a way to stay there, but still make money and make a living. And so he teamed up with this guy named Louis Vasquez. And they realized that in this one part of Wyoming, at the time, it was back in 1853, all these people were moving west, whether it be for, land or gold or, just stories of how much better it was back, west. But all these people were moving west. It was a big, huge westward movement. And we had the Oregon Trail, the Mormon Trail. There was the Pony Express,
California Trail.
the California Trail. They all kind of merged in this one part of Wyoming. It kind of all merged to this one
All
part.
came
And then,
together.
yeah, it all kind of came together, and then it would break off. If you were heading on, the California Trail, you head this way. If you were going up the Oregon Trail, you'd head kind of, northwest, So they thought this would be a perfect place to have like a fort, like a mercantile type thing, a business. So they kind of put together these people who went through there. They had reported that some of the buildings weren't as nice as another fort that was further east of it called Fort Laramie.
Right.
So, but, it had all the essentials, and they knew that, they were businessmen. They knew that there was nothing else for miles around. So their prices were kind of high. They, they tried to make a living out of this, and they tried to make the most of this opportunity.
Right.
So there was one little thing that they would do. They would, which I thought was pretty funny. They would, let's say, all these people were traveling with their oxen. So by the time coming up and over and going miles and miles and days and months and months with the same oxen, the oxen would lose all this weight. And because it was Wyoming, they had all this nice grass that the oxen could feed off of. So they would come there, and he would say, "Hey, I got these fresh new oxen for you for the rest of your trip. You know what? And it's going to be $300 for 2 new oxen. But you know what? Because I like you," they're like used car salesmen, but with oxen. "But because I like you, I'm going to give you $70 for your 2 oxen." And then the people are like, "Oh, yeah." And so then those people would take off with these big fat oxen, and then they would keep those oxen there and, feed them, fatten them up off the grass. These oxen would be able to, get their health back. They'd eat off the grass. And the next people coming through with their skinny little oxen, he'd sell them the oxen he fattened back up, So it was kind of like this business that he was doing. So I thought that was pretty funny. But so at the time, that part of Wyoming was actually part of the Utah Territory. And so the governor over this part of the Utah Territory was a man by the name of Brigham Young. And if you're Mormon or if you know anything about Utah, that name's very familiar to you. Yep. So he was the governor of the Utah Territory, which covered this part of the area. Well, as more and more people were moving west, the government's long arm of the law was moving west as well. And so they started implementing these laws. And so one of them was that you were not allowed to sell alcohol or any kind of merchandise to the Native Americans. And so Jim, I keep wanting to call him Jeff Bridges, not the actor, Jim Bridger. So let's not confuse him with Jeff Bridges. Jim Bridger, he ignored it. So he would continue to sell. Well, the Mormons didn't like this because, one, the Native Americans would be getting drunk and so they'd start shooting at people. Then the Mormons didn't feel safe. And because another thing, it was alcohol and guns. That's actually were the two main things that they could not sell to the Native Americans. And so, so the Mormons started complaining, and not even just the Mormons, some of the people in the area that were settling there, they started complaining that Jim was doing this illegal stuff. And so Mr. Brigham Young sent down a group of militia to try to stop him. Once Jim heard about this, he took off from the fort. He left the fort, hid out in an eagle's nest. His wife would take him food and supplies and stuff, and she eventually was able to sneak him some horses that he actually took off, and he went to Washington, D.C. because he wanted to complain that they stole his fort from him, so he wanted to take it up to the Senate, up to the big men up at the Capitol Hill. But so at the time, the Mormons ended up taking over the fort for a while there. And they actually built a 6-foot wall because it was a lot of hearsay and with the government and the Mormon people. So the Mormons believed that the government was going to come from Washington, D.C. to kill them and to kill all the women and children. People in Washington, D.C. thought the Mormons were building this huge army to create this war. So this kind of area right here, there was a lot of controversy. So it was called the Utah War or the Mormon War. But in fact, nobody actually lost their life for it. I know that
no gunfire.
No gunfire during this time. But there is a part in history where the militia did kill about 120 innocent men, women, and children that were moving westward. And they incorporated the help of Native American tribe to help them with it. So that did happen. But other than that, there was, and it had nothing, I don't even think it had a connection to that. But it was just, at the time, there was a lot of confusion in what was happening. So the government, for Mr. Bridger goes running down there saying, there's these people that took over my fort. They took it away. They stole it from me. I have over $100,000 of stuff that they stole from me. And so the government, and I don't know how Mr. Jim Bridger was that powerful, but the government said, hey, we're going to send men down there then to stop this. So as they're coming westward, the Mormons hear about this and the ones that are at the fort, and that's why they built the big old wall, because they think they're going to be able to stop them. But they realize that they're probably going to be no match for the American army or the men that were coming down. So they ended up setting fire to the fort and setting fire to all the brush around it so that they can buy themselves some time. And by the time the army came, it was winter. It was going on winter. So they couldn't use the fort because it was all burnt down. That whole area was burnt. The brush was burnt. So they went like 3 miles south of it. They set up camp and they sat there through the winter. And at some point they sent some guides out, up to Salt Lake City to kind of, feel what's happening, kind of see what's going on with this big, huge militia they thought the Mormons were building to go against the government. And when they actually go over there and they sit down and talk, they realize like, hey, are you building up a military to go after the government? And they're like, well, no, we just want to live. And they're like, you're not coming here to kill all our men, women, and children. And they're like, no. And so it was just one conversation and it ended it all. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it was just one, but it was, they were finally sat down to talk and they realized this wasn't happening. Well, by the time all this was said and done, what happened to Mr. Jim Bridger? Well, he tried to come back to his fort. He tried to come back and get it back. But by this time, the government wasn't allowing the Mormons to lay claim to the fort, and they weren't allowing Jim Bridger to lay claim to the fort. And there was even in some of the information I found that actually Louis Vasquez, the partner of Jim Bridger, he actually sold the fort under Jim Bridger to the Mormons. And then there's some saying that no, Jim Bridger knew about it. He agreed to get paid $4,000 for, the fort.
$4,000.
Yeah. Well, back then, it was a lot of money.
That just
1853. Well,
crazy.
This is all the way going up to 1857. We're going, a few years have passed. But Mr. Bridger wants his fort back because he sees all these at first, before they burnt it all down, he saw all the wall and everything that they did to build it up. But there was a lot of confusion in who was going to get the fort, who wasn't going to get the fort, who was going to get the land. Well, and the whole fort didn't get burned down. Like the wall was still there. There was still stuff there because after the Mormons left and the government said, nope, no one's taking this. It's ours now. So actually the government took it over and they ran a store out of it. They made it like a post where when their men would come through, they'd have a place to stay. And so a man by the name of Carter came down, and he actually is Wyoming's first millionaire because he started a store out of this fort. It was really interesting. It's like a lot of stuff happened at this fort.
So much.
And I don't even know how to wrap it all up so that we can get to the Donner Party stuff. But there was Calamity Jane stayed at this fort. She was a laundress there. Mark Twain was a guest of the Carters because Mr. Carter, he came originally with the military and he ended up staying there, and they allowed him and gave him permission to open up, I'm going to say it wrong, but a commissary? Commissary, something like that, right? Commissary, like where a trading, like where they can, like a store.
A store. He opened up
like a store, and he was allowed to sell. The government gave him permission, and all the goods would come. And so he ended up opening up a town off one of the railroad tracks, named it Carter. And we'll put pictures in here because we actually went to that town.
Yep.
Cool little town.
So cool.
I think there might be on one hand, I can probably count the amount of people that probably reside in that town now.
Oh, yeah. Very small.
Yeah. It was super small. It was considered a ghost town.
Yeah.
It's not up and running. But at the time, all the goods would come into the town of Carter, and he would take it down to Fort Bridger. And it was about 3 to 5 miles away from Fort Bridger. But we had the opportunity.
We had to ask for directions.
Yeah. It was really, really cute. So we have the pictures here. Oh, hold on. Oh, I don't have my button. We have the pictures here. I don't have my button of sound. Do a real cute sound for that. But, and so, we were able to visit that. So that was a lot of fun. But, we had, Chief Washaki. I'm telling you, I'm going to mess up people's name, but I think that's actually it. Chief Washaki. He's the one that I think I mentioned him on another podcast, but maybe I haven't. But he's known, he's very well known because he actually was in negotiations with the American government over land in Wyoming because the Native Americans that was their land. And so the town that my daughter lives in, Thermopolis, was actually given to the American people, or signed over to the American government because of their hot springs. And so he said, hey, you can have these hot springs, but as long as we can still use them, and they're going to be free for people to use. So still to this day, there's a hot spring there.
So cool.
That they're not allowed to charge you to go see it. There's other ones that are privately owned that you pay to go play in the hot springs, but they preserve one where from like 8 a.m. till 11 a.m. anybody can go in for free and enjoy the hot springs, which was thanks to Chief Washaki, because he's the one who said and had that in the stipulation. And he said, you guys can have this as long as this is for my people over here. And that's the Wind River Reservation over there in the Wyoming area. So that my daughter's little town lives in. So, but
that was such a cool little area to visit.
Yeah.
It was, the history behind all of it is really, really interesting.
There's so much. I don't even know how to say it. Like, I have so much in my head, and to say it. And sometimes I think to myself, like, slow down, Shannon, you have time, just say it all. But it's like so much is in my head right now on how much history's in this area, and it gets me really, really excited. And I don't know if you can tell that it gets me excited, but I get really, really excited about it. But to make the connections, because it's funny, because when we're out there, we're just like, okay, we're going to visit here, we're going to visit there, we're going to visit there. And then we come back and we start researching, and we're like, oh, wait a second. I know about that deal that he made with the people about the land.
Connected.
I didn't know that it was signed at Fort Bridger. Like, that's where they did the agreements. That's where they did the signing for it, for these agreements, was actually at Fort Bridger. So it's like, it's funny how we didn't have some of these places in mind we were going to visit, but yet the connections there.
Yeah.
And
the
history.
It seemed to like all fall into place too. Like it was a good trip.
Yeah.
It was a really good trip.
Wait a second, I did go there. So, Mr. Carter, first Wyoming millionaire, and that fort's still there, and poor little town's not really there anymore, but
and that is his safe that we saw.
Yes. So we're going to have, we'll have the picture there. So we have a picture of a safe that was in the museum at Fort Bridger, and the man that we interviewed,
never been opened.
Never. They can't figure out how to open it, and they don't want to ruin it.
Yeah.
And so they agreed just to have it. So don't even know if there's
what's in there. Yeah.
If it's
Could
empty
be nothing.
or if there's millions of dollars.
Who knows?
The story of the safe.
That safe that you're looking at there was Mr. Carter. He was the sutler here at the fort, and that is where he kept his millions of dollars. We're sure of it. He was the first millionaire in the state of Wyoming. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we can't get in the safe. We don't know the combination to the safe. So
it's like Al Capone's vault.
Right?
Can we call, what's his name with the mustache? Not Jerry Springer. What was his name? Back in come on, I'm dating myself, 90s. He went into Al Capone's vault. Gerardo?
Geraldo Rivera.
You know the one I'm talking about with the mustache.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Gerardo. I could see his name in my mind.
Geraldo Rivera.
Yes. So, can we get him on that?
Yeah, maybe.
So,
is he still alive?
Oh gosh, I hope so.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I think he's still alive.
We can do it if he can't.
We can be there.
We know our way there.
That's true.
We know those people. We know people.
We're like this.
We know people.
They're our besties now.
Yeah.
So
we know people.
But another interesting fact, because we were talking about Fort Bridger, and we're like, visiting there, it's not the same. I can tell you everything about the history and everything, but it's not exciting. There's no real connection until we found out that through listening and re-listening to the interview we had with the guy at Fort Bridger, and I have his name and I wrote it down, and for some reason it's slipping my tongue. I even had him spell it out, but he talks about the Donner Party.
Yeah.
and how it's connected to Fort Bridger, because at Fort Bridger, kept telling him, the people there kept telling the Donner Party, you need to move on.
Yeah.
But they were waiting for a guide.
The parties that stopped out there and stayed there for way too long was the Donner Party. And if you're familiar with them, what happened to them when they were crossing the Sierra mountain range was not good. And the reason they had problems because they sat here for 3 weeks out here in this field. And people encouraged them, said, you need to get on the trail, you need to get going, winter's coming. But they sat there convinced that Mr. Hastings, who had the new Hastings shortcut, was going to show up and show them that shortcut. Finally, they decided to go ahead and leave, and they're sure that they were going to find the Hastings Trail. When they get down here to Echo Canyon, just outside of Salt Lake City, they ran into nothing but trees and brush, and they couldn't get through, so they spent 13 days cutting trees and brush down. So there again, they were tied up for another almost 2 weeks. So by the time they got to Salt Lake, they were already 5 weeks behind. And so they kept making mistakes, and we know what happened.
We know what happened to them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let Gina take over on this part.
Yeah. So when we were planning to do this episode, I was like, to be there and visit is one thing, but to like talk about it is something else. And I wasn't retaining it. I wasn't retaining it. And again, like you guys know, Shannon is, a history major. So this stuff is really interesting to her. And I really like history, but only certain history. There has to be obviously
Blood.
something morbid connected to it for me to retain anything. There has to be something morbid connected. Yes. Unfortunately, for me to retain any information. And so I told her, I was like, I think this Fort Bridger episode, this might be a solo episode for you.
She's all take it over, because
it's all you.
Well, and the part that made me a little bit nervous is because I want it to be interesting too. And it's like, how do I make it exciting and interesting? Because to me, this is like amazing, but I've been there. Like
and
you
to
said.
many people, it might be.
Yeah.
It really might be. It's because again, history is very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. It really is. And don't get me wrong, like visiting these places and being able to like learn the history as we visited them is one thing. But I think to like retain it and read it, I was like, I'm going to make this. And obviously Shannon is way more bubbly than I am. So to hear me tell a story of Fort Bridger, it packs more of a punch with her, we'll say. But with the Donner Party, I was like, oh, I can talk about that. I can talk about cannibals. Yeah. I can talk about that. So,
and that's usually what comes to mind. You say the Donner Party, cannibalism.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. But I'll let you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's actually, I have quite a few pages here to read. And this is a very condensed version of what happened. If you have done any research or read anything on it, it's a very long, drawn out, very detailed story. Like you could go on for hours about it. So this is just a little bit about their journey through the California Trail. So when the immigrants were traveling on the California Trail, it needed to be mapped out and planned for them to be able to head west late enough in the spring because they needed grass for their pack animals. And to read this and to think like, oh my God, like who would think about that? But I guess, back at that time, if that's what they did, like these are the things.
It's like how we do our gas station stops.
Exactly. But they also had to keep winter in mind too, because the winters were pretty grueling too. So they had to travel, they had to leave at a certain time to be able to get to certain places before severe storms hit. So the perfect time for them to leave would be mid to late April. That was like mapping it out. That would have been the perfect time for them to leave. However, the Donner Party didn't leave until May 12th. So they were a little behind schedule, a few weeks behind schedule. And they left from Independence, Missouri. So that's where they started, which
pretty in the Midwest.
It is. It really is. So because of this late start, they had very little room for error. And they also, they were the last major pioneer train of 1846. So a man by the name of Lansford Hastings, who was a guidebook author, was promoting a faster path than most California-bound pioneers were using. However, he had never done this before.
He never went on the trail himself.
Never.
He found it off of maps.
Yes.
Like,
so he was just looking at a map. Oh, this looks like it would be so much faster. I think you should go this way. So, yeah, not such a great idea. But anyway, they ended up naming this the Hastings Cutoff. That's the route that they called it. So the Donner Party kind of knew that this was not a great idea. However, they went through with it anyway. So taking their 20 wagons, which is a lot, that's a lot to go through and like not know where you're going. And nobody's done this before. They went through the Hastings Cutoff. However, this decision proved very disastrous, and they ended up having to cut down trees, and they nearly died of thirst during a 5-day crossing of the Salt Desert. That sounds horrific. The Salt Desert, like that just...
I'm like...
sounds like dehydration city.
We went
to
through
me.
Death Valley, and like just to walk from the car to the store into the bathroom. I mean, it was bad.
Yeah. So it sounded pretty grueling. So this so-called shortcut added nearly a month to their journey. So instead of making it
a cutoff.
Shorter and a cutoff, it added an entire month. And then you also have to take into consideration they started a few weeks late. So they're screwed at this point.
Yeah.
So through all of this, most of the Donner Party still managed to reach the slopes of the Sierra Nevada by early November 1846. Put that into perspective. They leave on May 12th, and here we are in November.
October, November. Yeah, and I heard that I was reading. I didn't hear. It's like I'm talking to people. Yeah, they were gossiping.
Back in 1846.
I know. They rang me on the telephone.
Yeah.
But they said, I was reading that they stayed too long, like at certain places, and Fort Bridger was one of them where they just were sitting and sitting.
People were telling them, you need to move on.
You need to go. And they're like, well, we're waiting for this guide. And he was like, nope, not doing it.
Yeah.
You know, see you later. Like, I'm not.
Yeah.
What? You want me to? No, I'm not going to lead you on that. And so he actually abandoned them and left them to their own devices. So they waited, I don't know, extra days, extra week, whatever it was, the amount of time that was too long. Because people were saying you need to go up and over the Sierras before the snow. And
yeah.
To think that they had to cut down trees.
That didn't happen. Yep. So they only had a few hundred miles left, and unfortunately, an early blizzard blanketed the Sierras in several feet of icy snow. So early winter. This forced the Donner Party to go to nearby Truckee Lake and wait out the winter in tents and cabins. And these were pretty dilapidated. Like, they were not in great condition. So most of their livestock and their supplies had already been lost on the trail, and it wasn't long before they began to perish from starvation, obviously. I mean, I can't even imagine. I don't know. I just, not having a bottle of water, like, I don't know. I can't. I cannot even fathom any of this. Most of the Donner Party was made up of young children and adolescents, which is so sad to me. Of the 81 that were stranded at Truckee Lake, more than half of them were younger than 18 years old, and 6 of them were infants. They were babies.
They were families. And their caravan or their wagons, they were like top of the line type wagons where they would carry everything. But I was reading that most of the people would overpack them. And by the time they were heading across country, like the stuff was,
it's just coming. They had
to dump it and stuff, but
they had to leave it.
But these caravans that they did, or the wagons that they got, they did it, and they were saying because 9 times out of 10, the woman was pregnant. Like,
oh, of course.
yeah. So
Yeah, of
they were
course.
having children on these
Oh,
trails.
yeah, on
and,
these.
and it's
They
like,
just kept
and you
multiplying.
just see, the amount of people that went, but and I don't even know the details, but go on.
There's a lot.
I'm like,
So most of the eventual survivors ended up being children.
oh, so that's what I was
Yes.
curious about.
Yeah. One of them named Isabella Breen, and she would go on to live until 1935. And mind you, this is in 1846.
Wow.
So, that's a long
life.
time.
Yeah.
So on December 16th, 1846, after being stranded for more than a month, 15 of the strongest members decided to use some makeshift snowshoes and walk out into the mountains to find help. I want to know what those snowshoes look like.
Makeshift.
Like, I wanna know.
Twigs.
Yeah, I mean,
I was
who
like-
knows what they were using at this point?
Yeah. I'm picturing like almost like a tennis racket kind of thing, but that's only because like that's what you buy. But
Yeah,
theirs were makeshift.
yeah.
So I'm like,
who knows? Who knows? So after being out for several days, they were left starving and on the verge of collapse, and they resigned themselves to cannibalism. So, they were talking about human sacrifice, and so it got. I feel like it got pretty ugly.
dark.
Yes. So, they also talked about having 2 of the men square off in a duel. Like, but figure, like, I mean, they're starving.
Yeah.
They're starving.
I don't.
They're just gonna start offing people at this point. Anything. I mean, and it gets worse than this. It really gets worse. So not long after this, several members of the party naturally just died, because they were just malnourished and everything. So the survivors roasted and consumed their corpses. And as gruesome as this was, it gave them the energy that they needed. And after walking for a month, 7 of the original 15 made it to a ranch in California and helped organize rescue efforts. So of those 15 strong men,
So 7 actually
only
made,
7 of them made it. 8 of them
and
passed.
and there's still the women and children back at the
Mhm.
original camp. So these are
Yeah.
just the 15 men with the
strong
snowshoes.
ones with the snowshoes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And so they helped to organize, rescue efforts to go back and get everybody. And historians would later dub their hike the Forlorn Hope. The Forlorn Hope. Yeah. So during this expedition, 2 Native Americans joined the Donner Party. Their names were Salvador and Lewis. They joined them shortly before they became snowbound. So before the storm.
Before they made it up and
Yes.
over. Okay.
Yes. So, however, they refused to engage in any cannibalism whatsoever. And they later ran off out of fear of being murdered. Once they ran out of meat, they thought they were going to eat them. So they took off.
Because they were seeing them eat the dead.
Yes. And they refused to do that. And so they figured, you know what, we have to take off now, because when they run out of people to eat, they're going to kill us and eat.
Yeah.
We're next. We're next on their list. So a few days later, they found these men after they took off. They found them in the snow, exhausted, like dying of exhaustion, basically, and obviously malnourished.
Why were they hunting them down?
No, I think they were just walking and they
just
found them.
Oh, okay.
And
because they took
so-
off ahead of them.
Because they just took off. And so when they found them days later, they were lying in the snow, and a member of the party of the Donner Party named William Foster shot both of the men in the head, and they were then butchered and eaten by the hikers. So what they thought was gonna happen happened.
Did happen, yeah.
Yeah. This was the only part of the entire winter that people were murdered for use as food.
Okay, so that was the only time.
That they were actually murdered, yes. I think they were eating the people that were dying naturally.
Yeah.
But these 2 Native Americans were actually murdered, unfortunately. So by this time, their supplies were getting really low, and the immigrants that were stranded at the lake at Truckee Lake still, resorted, this word, to me, this sounded worse than eating people. They resorted to eating very grotesque meals. They slaughtered their pack animals. They cooked their dogs. They ate leftover bones, and they even boiled the roofs of their cabins that were made out of animal hide.
Wow. I mean, how hungry though and desperate do you need to be to even consider
I
it?
mean,
But
and imagine not only being hungry, but you're freezing cold. You're trying to take care of your kids, and like these are children.
yeah.
And
And then imagine if it's your family member who dies naturally and then you're having to eat
them. Yeah.
And then having to live with that because you survived.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, like, people now, like, when you have nothing to do with that, you have survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
And
imagine this. So they would take this these roofs that were made out of animal hide, and they would boil them until they turned into like a paste. And that's how they would eat it. Like, I mean, I guess any way you eat it is gross,
Yeah.
but like as a paste, I have texture issues.
Yes.
to
like-
put my, like, mash up my roof into a paste and try to eat it. Yeah, not so
Yeah.
much. I think at that point I would just throw the towel in and be like, okay, just take me now.
No insects, no slugs, no. I'm just like thinking.
I don't know. I don't know what was available to them out there.
don't
It was
either.
probably all frozen.
That's true.
I mean, you don't see I don't go to the snow often, but I don't think you
Yeah.
see insects flying around in the snow.
I don't either. I don't function well in anything above or below 80.
Right? We're very spoiled out here, if you haven't noticed.
I throw my Uggs on when it gets to 60 or below.
Yeah, because we're like, we're freezing.
Where it's
Once
really
it hurts,
cold.
I told
When it
Johnny
goes,
the
like,
other
69,
day. I did. I told
60.
Johnny the other day, I was like, it is freezing. He's like, Gina, it is 65 degrees. I'm like I said, it's freezing.
Thank you.
I'm cold. So by this time, several people died of malnutrition, while the rest of them survived on pieces of boiled leather and tree bark until rescue parties arrived in February and March of 1847.
Wow. So almost a whole year after you left.
Almost a whole year that this took them. So roughly half of the Donner Party survivors eventually resorted to eating human flesh. So of the 5 months the Donner Party spent trapped in the mountains, nearly half of it took place after they had already been located by rescuers. The first relief parties reached the settlers in February 1847, but since pack animals were unable to navigate the deep snow drifts, they only brought whatever food and supplies they could carry. So they were doing this back and forth thing, back and forth, back and forth. So by then, many of the immigrants were too weak to travel, and several died while trying to walk out of the mountains. 4 relief teams and more than 2.5 months were eventually required to shepherd all the Donner Party survivors back to civilization. So they said that, so the last to be rescued was a man named Louis Keseberg. He was a Prussian pioneer who was found in April 1847. Like almost a whole year. Supposedly half mad and surrounded by cannibalized bodies of his former companions. He was later accused of having murdered the other immigrants for food, but charges were never proven. So perhaps the most famous of the Donner Party saviors was John Stark, a burly California settler who took part in the third party relief. In early March 1847, he and 2 other rescuers stumbled upon 11 immigrants, mostly children, who had been left in the mountains by an earlier relief group. This man isn't like doing the Lord's work out there. So this was mostly kids that had been left. So the 2 other rescuers each grabbed a single child and started hoofing it back down the slope, but Stark was unwilling to leave anyone behind. So instead, he rallied the weary adults, gathered the rest of the children, and began guiding the group single-handedly. Most of the kids were too weak to walk, so Stark took to carrying 2 of them at a time for a few yards, then setting them down in the snow and going back for the others. That's crazy to me.
Wow.
He continued this grueling process all the way down the mountain and eventually led all 9 of his charges to safety.
How long did it take him?
I don't.
Does it say?
It doesn't
That's just
say.
crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't say, but I can't even.
Well, I can't believe the men who left the 11 children behind.
Right.
Like, already I'm like appalled. I'm like,
Yeah. It says speaking of the incident years later, one of the survivors credited her rescue to nobody but God and Stark and the Virgin Mary. So like that's how they thought of him, like, you know, like a higher being.
Yeah, that relief group number two wasn't doing it. And so relief group 3 came in and thank God Stark was part of it.
Yeah, thank God, right? Because who knows what would have happened. So of the 81 pioneers who began at the Donner Party's horrific winter in the Sierra Nevada, only 45 managed to walk out alive.
That's a huge number.
About half.
50%.
Yeah. The ordeal proved particularly costly for the group's 15 solo travelers, but 2 of them to whom died, but it also took a tragic toll on the families. George and Jacob Donner, both of their wives and 4 children, all perished. Pioneer William Eddy, meanwhile, lost his wife and his 2 kids. Nearly a dozen families had made up the Donner wagon trail, but only 2, the Reeds and the Breens, managed to arrive in California without suffering a single death. And if you remember Breen, she was the one lady who lived to almost be 100 years old.
So her whole family survived that left on the trail.
Yeah.
And so only 2 families stayed intact, but everybody else had lost somebody.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really devastating.
I mean, I don't know. I guess when you're a kid and you read about this stuff, like not just this, but just certain things like in history, you're just like, oh yeah, almost like it didn't happen. Like it's just like a story that somebody wrote. But as you read these things and talk about these things as you get older and you realize the stuff that people really went through back then, it's just mind blowing.
And you said that only one family was named Donner?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and were they the ones who led the charge? Is that what
I'm
it's
sure?
called?
The Donner Party. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when I started reading about all the different names, it was a little confusing.
I didn't even think there was a family named Donner. I thought it was just the name of the pass.
Of the pass.
The Donner Pass.
The Donner Pass.
And so that's why they called it the Donner Party.
Yeah. And what were we watching the other day? Where they were like, oh, it's Donner Lake and Donner this and Donner that.
Oh, yeah. It was a YouTube video on it.
Oh, my God. Like,
they named the whole area after this area.
Yeah,
near
after the Donner
Truckee
Party.
Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
everything over there is named after the Donner Party.
It's going up and over Nevada into California.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it gets pretty cold and the snow gets pretty high up in that area.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So it's
again,
over near Lake Tahoe, and
I don't even want to go to Big Bear. So.
Well, no, not if you're freezing in 65 degree.
No. So I can't imagine being stranded out there for almost a year trying to like have no food, no nothing. Like these poor people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the best of times.
And there's so much out there on the Donner Party. And it's amazing that much information came back, but it was probably due partly to or entirely to the survivors out there that told their story. So,
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But yeah, the story is Shannon and I actually started watching a video on the Donner Party, and it was, I want to say like 2.5 hours or something.
Yeah, there's so much information on it.
But she started talking, and I was like, I was lost before I was like, what is she talking about? Like, I had never even heard of these people before. So yeah, it's so involved, I think. And again, that's what happens with history, but it's just, I feel like it's just all connected at some point.
Yeah. That's what
connects.
I found really interesting. That I had no idea that the Donner Party was connected to Fort Bridger until I went back. Even though at the time I listened to him talk and I heard him say it, and it's just those little bitty facts that just leave your mind or your brain for a bit, and then so for him to shake it, I thought it was really interesting. Yeah. And that maybe we needed to talk on it and touch on it. Yeah, and talk about how all this history is connected and the trails and everything. How the people came over here, and that's how we ended up over here.
And it was so cool. Yeah, and it was so cool to just be there, like at Fort Bridger, and be standing there, like on the same ground. Like they actually like went through this area, like right
The
here
same
where
trails.
we're standing.
Yeah, and they showed the trail.
Yeah.
We even went to another fort that had the and that was close, I think, to Cody,
Mm-hmm.
where they had the Mormon ferry,
Yes.
where they would ferry the people back and forth on the lake, and it's a little stream.
It's
this time, but back then
it was
It was a
huge, yeah.
huge
Yeah.
with the big old ferry where they'd have to put all the ox and the thing, and they carry them
Take 'em
across
all.
this ferry. So just to get them out west. And during this time too, Mexico was fighting the Americans from coming to California because it was Mexico's
was
territory.
Mexico,
They didn't even
yeah.
want didn't
No.
even want the Donner Party there. I mean, it
Nope.
was Mexico.
Yeah.
You know, and there was this huge fight over the land over there during this time. So it's just crazy how all this history just kind of makes sense and comes together and just, you know,
It all connects
You
to
hear all
each
these
other.
different stories and you don't realize how close they are and how much they're intertwined with one another.
And I
So,
don't even know, like, I mean, obviously we both work in education, but, you know, we're both in special ed, and I don't even know how much of this history is still even taught in a general education class.
yeah, I don't know either. I
Yeah.
mean, that was my goal, was to teach history in high school. And so, but I ended up, you know, going off a different path and loving it even more. But, you know,
Yeah, I
don't even know.
be curious to know, like, you know, in the U.S. history class, which I think they normally take
I
their
think they-
junior year
yeah.
of high school, like, how much of this is really
I don't think it's not as
really
deep.
still taught?
Yeah, I think it's blown over,
Yeah.
or it's made to be prettier, or it's very biased.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, you know, but that's a lot of things. Like, even, you know, it's from one perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's good to go out there and find it on your own. And
Yeah, there's
you know,
a lot out there. A
listen
lot of
to people.
information out there.
yeah. So, well, thank you so much. Well, how can they find us?
They can find us at 50 States of Madness on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, Patreon. Everything is at
Yeah.
50 States of Madness. And we have
Absolutely.
our website that we need to,
And we are working on the merch. So, you know,
Yeah,
it's the design and everything. It's just about how to get it together and
Yeah,
get
it's
it out to you.
taking-
So,
that's taking a little longer than
we
had
anticipated.
originally anticipated. Yeah.
But it's coming.
But
Don't
it
worry.
is coming for
So,
sure. So thank you again
thank
to
you
all of
too.
our Patreons. We did not
Yes.
forget about you. We will definitely get you guys your shirts out to you and all the stuff that we promised you.
But
as
if you
soon as
like,
we get it.
But if you like to support us, you know, and
Yes.
help us, you know, to bring all this information to you and to be able to visit these places
Yeah.
where all this history and some of these ferocious, I don't even know if that's a word, but we're going to go with it, ferocious acts that we want to, you know, like, you know, just kind of, you know, take you there. And so, but please support us. We actually
because
really
I
appreciate
think that
it. It keeps us
I
going.
think it makes it a little more interesting too when you just don't talk about it, when you've actually been there and you visited these places. It's just, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like the cherry on top, you know,
Yeah.
to know that these are places that we visited and seen with our own eyes. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, we will
Thank
be
you so
back
much.
next week. And thank you for watching or listening. And make sure to follow us on all of our platforms. And we'll be back next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.